My name is Ruth Ihne, and I now live in Salem, New York, which is on the border of Vermont. And before that, ending in October of 2002, beginning in September of 1984, I lived at the corner of South End Avenue and Liberty Street. I am an attorney. I'm currently trying to develop a practice on my own. On September 11th, I was an employee of Lehman Brothers. And Lehman Brothers had a great many employees in the immediate area. We had 6,500 employees, I believe, in the immediate area, 750 in the North Tower, and the rest of us in the World Financial Center. We lost one employee, but only one. Many of us stuck around. Many of us did not run away after the planes hit. So we were all, like many of us, were in the immediate area. When the first plane hit, I was at the gym in the complex where I lived, which was within yards of the Trade Center. The building shook. I didn't know what had happened. I didn't think it was anything as serious as a plane crashing into the North Tower of the Trade Center, but it was. And as soon as I emerged from the gym, which was immediately, or almost immediately, within a couple of minutes after the plane hit, the top of the building was already seriously on fire. And I walked out to South End Avenue, and there was already a crowd that had started to gather. And there were already people who had escaped, who had gathered in the courtyard. They'd run across West Street to safety at the courtyard where I lived. And they were dressed in kitchen uniforms. And I thought at first that they were from Windows on the World, and then I realized they couldn't possibly have been. And instead they were from what used to be called the Vista Hotel, was then the Marriott World Trade Center. I got to my apartment and I called the woman who was responsible for evacuating our people, and I got her voicemail. I never spoke to her. I believe she had already given the order to evacuate at that time. And then I tried reaching my brother, who works in New Jersey, and I couldn't get through to him. The really odd thing is I got changed into work clothes, as if I were going to work. I went back downstairs, and as I was looking out my window, I thought I saw people I recognized from Lehman Brothers. So I thought, oh, well, if I mill around downstairs, I will find folks I need to find. And I believe the second plane hit while I was in the elevator. And so when I got back down, there was this big gash in the South Tower. We all milled around, and I kept looking for more people from the firm where I worked. And I found people, and I would ask them, have you seen so-and-so, and what's going on? And the top executives in the firm actually stayed inside the financial center, did not evacuate. They were in 3 World Financial, which was directly across from the North Tower. And they were there inside on the 10th floor when the first tower came down, making emergency plans for what was going to happen. I tried to get into 3 World Financial Center, and they wouldn't let me in at that point. But I kept milling around, and I asked around to people that I'd seen. Had they seen the woman who was responsible for ordering evacuations? And I finally found someone who had seen her, and they told me where she was. And it was a man and a woman that I worked with, and they were on the Esplanade at the time. And they said they were going to the ferry. They were going to make their way around the South Cove and try to get the ferry that was still running to get out. And they didn't make it, because by the time they got to the South Cove, the South Tower came down, and some small boats at first started to evacuate people. The first people were evacuated by small boats that their prows were not up high enough, and I think it was low tide. So when the woman that I knew, when she jumped to the boat she smashed her ankle into like smithereens, and she was out for months and months from work. He was okay. He jumped on the boat and he was okay. I, by that time, had made my way a couple of blocks south, where I did find the woman I was looking for. So we were sitting on a bench looking at the south tower, not at the north tower, because I didn't want to see. The people who jumped were all from the north tower. And so we were looking up at the south tower, and when I saw it happen, at first it was like there had been an explosion in the building at a certain point, and the skin of the building on that one floor popped out like that. And then it took a split second before the collapse began. And the next, so what we were seeing was two floors, the first two floors collapsing on each other. And then another one. And then the top of the building started going over this way. And I just lost my mind. There were a couple other people from work who were with me too. The woman that I had come to talk to, the one who ordered the evacuation, she started running, which was the right reaction. And I just started walking around in circles, and I wasn't one. So she ran back and grabbed us, and then we ran, but we didn't run. You couldn't run fast enough to escape the cloud. And we got as far as the river, and at the railing when the cloud came over us. And I remember while we were still in Battery Park, before we got on the boat, looking up, and you began to see enough to know that there was no building there anymore. And I remember saying to the woman I was standing with, I said, "The building's gone." But on the boat on the way over to New Jersey, I looked back at my building to see if I could make it out. Barely make it out. But I could see that there was smoke coming out of it. And, there were fires in that building. And I was like, oh, jeez, So I didn't know. I had no idea, for some days afterwards, whether I would be able to recover anything from my apartment, whether the building was structurally sound, whether they would let us back in at all. And it took a while to get any information about that. Well, the first day we got back, each of us had a National Guard escort, individual escorts for each person. And they let us in for 10 minutes. We had to walk up the stairs. And you had 10 minutes to take whatever you could find in that space of time and get out. And as soon as I walked in, I saw that it was clear that the door had been broken in. Because there were fires in the building at the same time that the gas lines had been cut, they thought that the building was going to explode. So they had gone through the lower floors and were breaking down doors to make sure no one was still inside. For those of us who lived there and who worked there, we know what happened. I went in and things were thrown out all over the place, and drawers had been emptied, and cabinets and stuff had been thrown on the floor. But the things that most mattered to me were left untouched. The most valuable things were, the photographs and memorabilia and that sort of stuff. When I stayed with my brother for most of the first week in New Jersey, and one of the first sane thoughts I had was to call one of the law firms that did a lot of work in the area where I worked and asked him, "Do you have space where we could sit?" And they did, and he made space. The name partner made space for us, and there were 5 of us. And they found chairs and desks and computer hookups and phones, and that happened in 38 different locations around the city. Many of us lost all of our documents, unrecoverable from the World Financial Center, or contaminated beyond recovery, because they can't decontaminate paper easily. There was quite a while where I had no books and no records of any kind, electronic or hard copy. And law firms helped us a great deal, because many of the things that we did, we also involved law firms on, and they had copies of things, and we reconstructed things. And, there was no network to speak of for a long, long time. We all transacted work on cell phones, and and like that for quite a while. And it was catch as catch can. You did makeshift stuff, and it was an opportunity to exercise some creativity. The firms, the publishers, were fantastic because all you had to do was call them up and say, I lost all my books, and they sent you another copy immediately. And those things they meant a lot. They meant a lot that the firms would just come up with the space. Meantime, my residence had moved from my brother's for the first week to a friend's in Midtown for 3 weeks. And from there to a corporate apartment on Pine and William Street. And that was a really unfortunate place to have chosen. And I lived there between like October 6th and the end of December. And the fires continued until like end of November, maybe the first week in December. But there were, and the smell was worse in the morning and the evening. Morning when you leave for work, evening when you're coming home. And it was horrible. It was just nauseating. In the week before Christmas, all of it moved. Every one of those locations. And so that was quite a week. We got back in the financial center for the first time. I had to pack up my office and my assistants who was out on maternity leave. Up until that point, it was all just coping, day to day, day to day. And it wasn't until I moved back and stayed there overnight for several days that it really all hit me. That the coping, I no longer needed to cope now. I'm back home, and it was horrible. And there was very little prospect for change in the near future, and it was a scary place to be, and it would never be the same. So that's up until that point, it was, thank God I didn't die. That's when it finally became difficult for me. It was when I was back. And it was at that point that I actually sought help, because I was just crying all the time, and I really couldn't explain why. Whatever well of resilience I had emptied. It's completely gone. And I did seek help, and I found a woman who was a therapist who specialized in trauma. And I can't sit here and tell you why it is I feel so much better now than I did. But I know it was as a result of that therapy. It was hugely helpful to me. I have to say it was also very helpful that I worked with all those people who had been through the same thing as I. We all gave each other a lot of slack. All of us had memory problems, short-term memory problems. I'd have a conversation with somebody and they'd say, will you do X, Y, Z for me? And I'd say, yeah. And then, 2 days later, they'd say, well, where's X, Y, Z? And I'd start to laugh. And I'd say, I have absolutely no recollection. You're having asked me that. And they would laugh too, because they would completely understand. So that was helpful. So I lost all short-term memory of anything that happened immediately before the events. Just as if it never happened. And it helped to be able to be in a conversation with people and to just casually say, well, on September 11th, this, that, or the other thing, and it's not, this and that. And it's not like this, big thing. It was part of our lives. It was something we went through. For a while, I almost had this image of myself carrying this big thing around. This big invisible thing that was up there, this huge weight. And I carried it with me wherever I went. I sat at a dinner party. There was this thing there. They didn't see it, but I knew it was there. The September, the first anniversary ceremony, and when it was announced that they were going to have family members and also ordinary citizens, I think that's the way they described it, as people who were reading the names, I volunteered and I tried to figure every way I could to make sure that I would be considered as a volunteer for one of the readers. And ultimately I was successful. But a large part of what motivated me was knowing that had I not volunteered, I would not have been even permitted to be there. And they didn't give us the names, and they didn't tell us the pronunciations. I tried my very best to get the pronunciations correct, and I researched every one of those people. I knew every one of them. I knew their family members. I knew the names of their children, so that if by chance at the ceremony I were to meet family members, I would know them. They weren't total strangers to me. Not only was I there to bear witness to what happened, and to be a part of it, but I felt almost as if I was sort of representing the residents who, had been there at the time, to whom, who were also victims in a way. Being able to participate in those ceremonies was itself therapeutic in a major way. And, I don't think there was a person who lived in my building who was there when it happened who wouldn't have traded places with me. What I miss the most about living and working in New York City is just, the vibrancy of the place. It's entertaining just to walk on the street. The diversity, the amazing, talent and interesting things. I mean, just people are so wonderful here in the city. I am not the same person that I was. I actually think I'm a better person. I have different priorities, and I'm a more spiritual person. And all of those things are to the good, and they're surprising to me. I would never have predicted that the person that I was would have changed in the way that I changed. I think this would change anyone, but I guess that's it.